This video is sponsored by Paint Codex, the all-in-one mobile app that helps you make the most of the painting time you actually have. But more on that later. The Inner Circle companions are without a doubt some of the coolest and most mysterious models in the current Dark Angels range, as even many of the chapter masters within the Unforgiven themselves don't know the identity of these figures or what their purpose is. In fact, the only thing we do know for sure about these mysterious, silent-robed figures wielding Calibanite greatswords is that they speak in an encrypted language mostly only amongst themselves. They show up for important battles, mostly bodyguarding Dark Angels or Unforgiven heroes. And finally, probably the most important clue towards their identity is that they showed up just after the Lion himself returned to the galaxy, which, if you've read Lion, Son of the Forest by Mike Brooks, which you really should get on that if you haven't read it, should give you some idea of who these might be. However, as cool as these characters are, they are also a little bit expensive, coming in at around $60 Canadian for a paltry 3 models, and that's if you're getting the 15% off retailer discount. However, after seeing a lot of cool Inner Circle companions kit bashes online and hearing that they come with enough accessories and weapons to make a double unit if you simply provide your own legs and torsos, I was finally sold and decided to invest a little bit of money into this kit, which I have to admit is quite beautiful. It comes with a ton of amazing Dark Angels parts. It's a really well sculpted kit. Highly recommended if you're not worried too much about the price. For the first 3 models, I built them basically as intended, following the instructions. And after these were done, there were indeed many parts left over, including 3 spare hooded heads, 3 spare Calibanite greatswords, 3 spare extra incense burners for the backpacks, and 3 spare tilting shields. In summary, this kit is basically begging to be kit bashed in this way. It's one of the easiest conversions I've ever done. There's a lot of different bodies you could use to convert more Inner Circle companions. For me personally, I used the Stormcast Hero Sprue from the Scaventide box set, which contains these 3 Stormcast Reclusians, which I had seen online were a common kit bash to use with the Inner Circle Companions kit, as the arms fit rather well with the bodies. After doing a quick mock-up with poster putty, I realized, yes, this works perfectly just as I've seen online, and there's even a 4th model on the sprue, which makes an excellent conversion for a Justiciar, which is a great hero to use to lead your Inner Circle companions. He even has an hourglass sculpted onto the model. I don't know how you could ask for a better one. So honestly, this sprue is amazing if you are a Dark Angels player looking to do some kit bashing. It even comes with these 3 cool robed cultist guys who might be fun to use as Dark Angels chapter serfs. That's a project I'd like to tackle eventually, as well as another armored Stormcast hero, which might be another great basis for a Dark Angels kit bash, as just look at how many of these lion motifs are sculpted into his armor. That's just begging to be a Dark Angels conversion. So as far as the kit bashing goes, this process was pretty easy. Mainly, it involved clipping off and filing down any Stormcast specific symbols, cutting away a bit of excess plastic near the armpits to help the Dark Angels robes fit better, adding on some Space Marine backpacks from my collection to any models that lacked them, and of course applying tilting shields to everyone and using these to cover up any of the rough joins between the arms and torsos. For our Justiciar, his axe was still looking a bit too Stormcasty, so using a spare axe head from one of the Reclusians, I replaced the offending axe head to create a proper 2-handed axe head for our Executioner, filling in the gap, of course again, with sprue goo. As I only had 6 backpack incense burners, I decided to add this little candelabra bit from the Night Haunt chain rasp sprue onto the back of the Justiciar for an extra little bit of interest. And finally, I glued guns onto everyone's hips who needed guns, once again drawing from my collection of Space Marine bits to make sure everyone is perfectly WYSIWYG. So with a bit of clipping and gluing, I was able to convert these 3 models into 7 models. And as for the basing, I used pretty much my usual Dark Angels Forest basing scheme. I've left a link down in the description to the basing secrets video where I explain how to do that. And with our basing complete, it's finally time to move on to painting. And while the rest of the video is dedicated to that, if you would like a faster way to reference all of the different steps and paints that I use for this process while doing it yourself at home, I highly recommend checking out the full recipe over on Paint Codex, which is an app made by this video's sponsor, Battle Servo Studios. Paint Codex is the all-in-one mobile app made by one passionate hobbyist to help other hobbyists make the most of the painting time they actually have, giving you an intuitive way to collect all of your painting recipes, tutorials, and notes all in one place. And while this is extremely useful for documenting your own work, it even has built-in voice capabilities, so you can just talk into it and it'll record your notes for you. One of the real interesting features that I think it has is this thing called the Nexus, which is essentially a library of painting recipes, both from Battle Servo Studios themselves, but also from content creators like me. So you can go on there and check out several of the paint doctrines based on my videos, such as this video that you're watching right now, or the Orc Bikers video, the Cyberpunk Necrons video, and probably more in the future. Oh, and did I mention this whole thing is free to download? This entire app is just made by one guy who's really passionate about the project, and I'm happy to help spread the word. However, if you do find the app useful and you want to support ongoing development of new features, it does have a premium paid version, which gives you the space to store unlimited paint doctrines, export and backup features, painting lists tools, as well as more updates planned for this summer, such as a paint matching tool to help you discover close painting alternatives across different paint brands, and a miniature painting color wheel to help you plan out your highlights, shading colors, complementary, and contrasting colors for your paint schemes. So if this sounds good to you, make sure to check out Paint Codex today. There's a link down in the description, and huge thanks to Battle Servo Studios for sponsoring this video. For painting these models, I started them out using the same 4 basic steps as all of my Dark Angels models. That's a prime of German Red Brown primer to get that warm undercoat, a follow-up of Pro Acryl Golden Brown overspray, and then a more selective titanium white overspray to highlight the model, paying special attention to the great swords, which you can see I'm adding alternating highlights on each side of the blade to start out our non-metallic metal sword pattern. I then sprayed the bases of our models from all sides using hardened leather to give our usual basing color, as well as from slightly below to get some nice shadows onto everything. As before, I'm also using this color here to start out our non-metallic metal pattern on the swords, this time reinforcing the alternating shadow colors on the swords. After this, I deviated from my usual Dark Angels recipe by skipping straight ahead to painting the robes. For me, the hardest thing to do is always painting wide flat areas such as robes, so I try to do this with the airbrush whenever possible. In this instance, because we already nailed all of the main highlights and shadows with our first few steps, I was able to just glaze on some speed paint murder scene over top to give us the basic look, adding several coats to areas that I wanted to be in shadow and just a single coat to areas that would be highlighted. Then, for any areas of dark green armor, I gave these a base coat of speed paint Absolution Green, as well as using this color to add further darker shadows to the robes in a few places. As we know, green makes an excellent shadow color for red, even a very dark red, like Murder Scene. As always, with both these colors, while I had them in my airbrush, I used each one to paint a bit of the foliage on the bases, as well as using both to reinforce the shadows on the non-metallic metal blades. I like adding as many glazes of different colors as possible when doing non-metallic metal swords. I find it gives a more realistic, shiny quality when there's a lot of different colors involved. I then used some speed paint Grim Black over top of the green to add even deeper shadows to the armor, as I want this armor to be darker than the standard Dark Angels color scheme. I'm thinking almost black, but with just a hint of green to represent how they are closer to that mystical element that surrounds the lion himself. And to finish up our airbrushing stage, I just glazed on a tiny bit of magic blue over top of the blades to make them look a little bit magical and shiny, as well as spraying just a little bit of magic blue onto the top parts of the armor to tint it into a slightly cooler scheme. I also added just a tiny bit of this color towards some of the light sources like the candles and incense burners to give them a cool risen from the dead sort of feel. And once all the airbrushing was done, I got right back to my normal non-airbrushing painting desk to add in all the details. Starting off with the very tedious step of painting on all of the metallics, using the same two colors I always use for my Dark Angels metallics, that being True Brass for silver and Emperor Gold for gold. When applying these, you can see I'm mostly edge highlighting or using a very controlled dry brush, using just the side of my brush to apply the color, leaving lots of the darker color below still visible in the recesses. Next, before we continue with the metallics, I went in and added a base coat of Tainted Garden to any areas that I want to be ivory or cloth colored later on. This is a very dark, desaturated greenish yellow color that I think works great for stuff like this. And you can see here I'm even painting it on as lines on these scrolls or purity seals, leaving the dark color underneath to give the impression of lines of writing. With our base colors now all complete and defined on the models, I mixed up some washes to help further define the shapes, using our old friends Grim Black and Hardened Leather from the airbrush steps, only this time thinning them down about 50% with speed paint medium to create some nice washes that we can use for a few different purposes. For the Grim Black, I'm using it with a very tiny brush to panel line the green armor, as well as an overall wash on any silver areas. And for the Hardened Leather, I used it as an overall wash on any gold or cream colored areas to once again deepen all of the shadows, but I also just like the overall chestnut tone it gives to everything. After this, I went back in and edge highlighted any of the more prominent metallic areas that I thought could use an extra highlight using True Brass, which again works great as a highlight color for both silver and gold. And from here, almost everything else on the model gets an edge highlight as well. Starting with Blighted Green for the base green for highlighting the armor. I like this one because it's almost identical to the color of the armor, but just a shade lighter, making it perfect as a starting highlight color for our dark green armor, as well as working great to clean up any areas of overspill from previous metallic steps. I then mixed a small amount of ivory into this color to get a brighter green highlight in just a few places, followed up by a few dots of pure ivory to really make things look metallic and reflective. After the dark green armor was painted, the next thing to get highlights was any ivory or bone colored parts of the model, and for this I mixed ivory into the previously used Tainted Garden for the highlights. After this, I added even more edge highlights to the models, this time to any of the burgundy areas using Blanched Berry. And then I mixed in successive amounts of barbarian flesh into the blanched berry when I wanted a higher highlight. While I was working with blanched berry, I also used a small amount of this color thinned down with water as a bounce light color coming up from the ground and reflecting onto the armor, which I think looks kind of cool. Next up, I wanted to give some attention to the great swords, so I started out by giving them a wash of Grim Black to just the text on the blades. I followed this up with an edge highlight of Proacryl Jade, to which I blended a little bit of a contrasting shadow color using thinned down Blanched Berry. And after this, I mixed some ivory into the jade for an even brighter edge highlight color. I finished things up on these by glazing on just a little bit more blanched berry where I wanted any of the shadows to be reinforced, and a final highlight of pure ivory in a few places to tidy up any mistakes and make them look even brighter. I also used some ivory to paint a few little lightning bolts around some of the power nodes on these swords to show that they are in fact power swords, and I finished these up by glazing over these lightning patterns with a bit of thinned down Pro-Acryl jade. While I was working in this spectrum, I painted on any effects for the lit incense burners and candles as well. Starting off by base coating any light source areas with ivory, then blending on some ivory mixed with jade, as well as finally pure jade as we get further and further away from the light source. I then stippled on some Tainted Garden to look like smoke towards the end of the incense trail, highlighting this with a mix of ivory and Tainted Garden, and finally a glaze of thinned down jade over any areas that needed further blending. I also painted on a few other details around this point, such as the eyes on the helmets, and also painted the faces. For the eyes, it was a simple coat of ivory followed up by bold pyrrole red, 1 or 2 dots of ivory to make the lenses look reflective, and then a final overall coat of fluorescent red to make things pop and to make them look cool under blacklight. For the faces, I started out by painting the eyes and mouth with grim black, added dots of ivory to paint the whites of the eyes and teeth, base coated the skin and any facial hair using various colors for each marine, and then in some cases I added a second lighter highlight color for the skin and facial hair as well. To finish everything up, I added a few areas of freehand on each model as well as water slide decals on each model where necessary, as well as a coat of thinned down matte varnish over top of these areas, especially the decals to help seal them in, and a coat of matte varnish over pretty much the entire model as well, aside from any metallic parts. And that's it. This marks the completion point for my Dark Angels Deep Forest Task Force, which is what I'm calling the first 1,000 points of my Dark Angels army. And I have to say, it was super satisfying to complete this 1,000 points over the past 7 months on the channel. If you want to see all the videos in this series, I've linked a playlist down in the description. Of course, we will still be expanding upon this army, but it's just nice to hit that first 1,000 points, which is about the point value that we tend to play at in my basement when we're playing Warhammer. Thank you again to Battle Servo Studios for sponsoring this video. Make sure to go and check out their mobile app, linked down in the description. And with that, actually, before we go, I would like to acknowledge the passing of a legend in our community recently. That is the late, great John Blanche, who has had such an immense impact on my art, as well as this art form in general. May he rest in peace, and our best wishes and condolences go out to his friends and family. RIP.